Welcome to Bite-Sized L&D, your quick, no-nonsense update on the latest in workplace learning. Today, we're cutting through the noise to uncover how to steer clear of Agile Theatre and embrace true Agile values for better team efficiency and satisfaction. All right, let's get straight into it. Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode where we're diving into the world of Agile methodology. I've got to be honest with you all. I'm at my wit's end with this whole Agile thing at my company. Every day, it feels like I'm spending more time in meetings than actually writing code. Anyone else feel like Agile has just become a buzzword that translates to death by meetings in practice?
I hear that frustration a lot from developers. As someone who's led technical teams for over 15 years, I'd be happy to share some perspective on what Agile is supposed to be versus what it often becomes. Maybe I can help distinguish between the noise and the signal.
I'd appreciate that. Because right now my day looks like this. I start with a 15-minute stand-up that inevitably runs 30 minutes because our Scrum Master insists everyone gives elaborate updates. Then there's the bi-weekly sprint planning that eats up 3 hours where we debate story points like we're negotiating nuclear disarmament. Then retrospectives, where we just regurgitate the same action items that never get implemented. By the time I get to actually coding, I've lost my focus, and half the day is gone.
That sounds incredibly frustrating. And unfortunately, it's also a common experience. What you're describing isn't Agile. It's what I call Agile Theatre. It's organizations adopting the ceremonies without understanding the underlying principles.
Agile Theatre, that's the perfect term for it. Last week, our product owner insisted we create detailed specifications for every single user's story. We spent days documenting every possible edge case for features that might not even make it into production. How is that Agile? It feels like we've just rebranded Waterfall and called it a day.
You've hit on exactly why so many developers become disillusioned. The core of Agile isn't about ceremonies or artifacts. It's about values. Many people don't realize that the Agile Manifesto is barely a page long. It was written by 17 software practitioners, including people like Martin Fowler and Kent Beck, who were looking for better ways to develop software.
Wait, Martin Fowler was involved. I've read his books on refactoring and clean code design. Those were game changers for how I approach development.
Exactly! The same thoughtfulness that went into his technical writing also influenced the Agile Manifesto. The manifesto consists of just 4 value statements and 12 principles. The 4 values are what really matter: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan.
That actually sounds reasonable. But in our environment, it feels like we've done the opposite. We've created so many processes and tools that the individuals and their interactions get lost. Our Jira board has more states than a quantum computer, and nobody can navigate it without a PhD in our particular flavor of Agile.
That's a common anti-pattern. Tools like Jira can be useful, but they should serve the team, not dictate how the team works. One of the principles from the manifesto states, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. If your team is spending more time maintaining process artifacts than delivering value, something's fundamentally wrong.
We had this situation recently where a customer reported a critical bug. Instead of fixing it immediately, we had to create a ticket, wait for it to be prioritized in the next sprint planning, assign story points, and so on. The customer waited 3 weeks for a fix that took 30 minutes to implement. How does that deliver value?
It doesn't, and that's not Agile. Another principle from the manifesto is, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. What you described violates that principle completely. In a truly Agile environment, that bug would have been addressed immediately because delivering value to the customer trumps following a predetermined process.
So how do you balance structure with flexibility? Because without some processes, wouldn't there be chaos?
Great question. Structure is necessary, but it should be minimal and evolve based on the team's needs. I like to start with the question, what's the simplest thing we could do to deliver value to our customers more effectively? Sometimes that means a daily stand-up makes sense. Other times, it might mean abandoning certain meetings altogether if they're not adding value.
In my company, we seem to have this religious adherence to the 2-week sprint cycle. There are features that could be done in 2 days and others that need 6 weeks, but everything gets forced into this artificial 2-week box.
That's another common misunderstanding. Nowhere in the Agile Manifesto does it specify sprint lengths, or even require sprints at all. These are specific implementations from frameworks like Scrum. The principle actually states, deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference to the shorter timescale. The key is frequency and adaptation, not rigid time boxes.
I've noticed something else too. We spend hours in refinement meetings breaking down user stories to make them smaller, but we lose sight of the overall product vision. Everything becomes about completing discrete tasks rather than building something coherent and valuable.
You've touched on another core principle. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. If your team is focused solely on completing isolated tasks without understanding how they contribute to user value, that's a failure of collaboration. One practice I've found useful is regularly revisiting the why behind features. What problem are we solving for users? How does this particular story contribute to that goal?
We rarely talk about the why in our processes. It's all about velocity metrics and burn-down charts. Our stakeholders are more concerned with whether we completed all our story points than whether we delivered something useful.
That's measuring output rather than outcomes. Another common mistake. Story points and velocity were intended as team tools for planning, not performance metrics for management. I've seen organizations become so obsessed with metrics, they forget the fifth principle. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done.
Trust seems to be the missing ingredient in our implementation. There's an implicit assumption that developers need to be heavily managed or they won't be productive.
Exactly. True Agile is built on a foundation of trust. Without it, you end up with micromanagement disguised as Agile practices. In organizations that truly embrace Agile values, teams are given autonomy to determine how they work best. The manifesto emphasizes individuals and interactions first for a reason.
You mentioned Martin Fowler earlier. Has he written about how Agile has been misapplied in industry?
Absolutely. Fowler has been vocal about what he calls flaccid Scrum, organizations that adopt the ceremonies of Scrum without the technical practices that make it sustainable. He emphasizes that without practices like test-driven development, continuous integration, and refactoring, teams accumulate technical debt that eventually slows them down, regardless of their process.
That resonates with our situation. We're pressured to deliver features quickly but never given time to clean up technical debt. Our code base is becoming increasingly brittle, which makes each new feature take longer to implement safely.
This touches on another principle. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. Technical debt is like financial debt. The interest payments eventually exceed your ability to pay the principal. True Agile recognizes that maintaining quality is essential for sustainable development pace.
Speaking of sustainable pace, that's another issue. We're constantly pressured to commit to more story points each sprint, leading to regular overtime and weekend work. I thought Agile was supposed to create a more humane work environment.
It absolutely should. The manifesto explicitly states, Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Burning out your team contradicts this principle entirely. The most effective teams I've led maintained consistent, sustainable velocity rather than heroic sprints, followed by recovery periods.
How do you handle situations where business demands seem to outpace what the team can reasonably deliver?
That's where customer collaboration becomes crucial. In a healthy Agile environment, there's transparent communication about capacity and trade-offs. Instead of promising everything and delivering nothing well, we have honest conversations about priorities. Remember, the manifesto values customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This means working together to determine what delivers the most value given the constraints.
That makes sense. In our case, everything is always highest priority, which effectively means nothing is prioritized.
That's a recipe for failure in any methodology. One practice I've found effective is limiting work in progress. By focusing on finishing a few high-value items, rather than starting everything at once, teams deliver value sooner and avoid the context-switching penalties that kill productivity.
I've also noticed that our QA process is completely disconnected from development. We throw completed stories over the wall to QA, who then find issues that require us to context switch back to work we thought was done.
Another anti-pattern. The principle states, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. That includes quality assurance. In more mature Agile environments, quality is built in from the beginning. Developers write automated tests, pair with QA specialists, and define acceptance criteria together before coding starts.
That brings up another pain point. Our definition of done keeps changing. Sometimes it means code complete. Other times it includes testing, documentation, and deployment. It's frustrating to think you finished something only to discover there were unstated expectations.
Transparency is essential in Agile. The team should have a clear, consistent definition of done that everyone understands and agrees to. This ties back to the principle of delivering working software frequently. If your definition of done doesn't result in potentially shippable increments, it's inadequate.
You've given me a lot to think about. It sounds like what we're practicing isn't really agile at all, but rather a collection of ceremonies without the underlying values.
That's a common situation, unfortunately. Many organizations adopt the trappings of Agile without embracing its spirit. The good news is that positive change often starts with awareness. By understanding the true values and principles of Agile, you can begin to identify which practices are helping and which are hindering your team.
How would you suggest I approach this with my team and management? I'm not in a position to overhaul our entire process.
Start small and focus on influence rather than control. Share the Agile Manifesto with your team. Ask questions like, how does this practice help us deliver value to our customers? Or, is this meeting helping us work more effectively? Even small improvements can create positive momentum.
I actually haven't read the manifesto in years. I should probably revisit it.
I'd highly recommend it. It's remarkable how such a short document has been so influential, and also how its core message has been diluted in many implementations. The manifesto isn't against documentation, processes, plans, or contracts. It just values the items on the left more.
One last question. What's the single most important thing you've learned about implementing Agile effectively?
That it's fundamentally about people, not processes. The most successful Agile implementations I've seen foster environments where people feel safe to experiment, fail, learn, and improve together. As the last principle states, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. When teams have the psychological safety to honestly assess what's working and what isn't, they naturally evolve towards practices that deliver more value with less waste.
That's refreshing to hear. Maybe I can start by suggesting we use our next retrospective to revisit our processes in light of the Agile values and principles.
That sounds like an excellent place to start. Remember, Agile was created by developers to address the exact frustrations you're experiencing. It was never intended to add bureaucracy or make developers' lives harder. Quite the opposite. It was designed to bring joy and purpose back to software development by focusing on what truly matters, delivering valuable software that solves real problems for real people.
Thanks for this conversation. It's given me a new perspective on Agile beyond the ceremonies and artifacts.
My pleasure. The fact that you care enough to question the status quo already puts you ahead of many organizations. True agility starts with that questioning mindset, always seeking better ways to develop software and help others do it. That's the real spirit of the Agile Manifesto.
That wraps up our discussion on the pitfalls of Agile Theatre and the importance of staying true to Agile's core values like flexibility, and collaboration. Stay tuned for more updates.